The massive plane was falling from the sky. 418 people were seconds from death. 2 experienced pilots had given up hope. Then a small voice behind them said, "I know how to fix this." They turned around, and saw a 12-year-old child standing in their cockpit. What happened next defied everything they knew about flying. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The massive Airbus A380 cut through the darkness at 38,000 feet, its 4 engines humming steadily as Flight 441 carried 418 souls across the night sky. In the cockpit, Captain Mike Reynolds and First Officer Sarah Chin monitored their instruments with the practiced ease of professionals who had flown this route dozens of times. Behind them, stretching back through 2 full decks of the enormous aircraft, passengers settled into their seats, some sleeping, some watching movies, some reading, completely unaware that in the next few minutes, everything would change. The first warning came without drama. A single amber light flickered on the overhead panel. Captain Reynolds glanced at it, his hand moving automatically to check the hydraulic system readouts. "Hydraulic system 2 showing fluctuation," he said calmly. Sarah nodded, her fingers already moving across the display screens to pull up the detailed diagnostics. Then the second light appeared. Then a third. Within 30 seconds, the cockpit transformed from a place of quiet routine into a chaos of alarms, flashing warnings, and increasingly desperate attempts to understand what was happening to their aircraft. "Hydraulic 1 is failing," Sarah called out, her voice tight. "Hydraulic 3 showing pressure drop. This doesn't make sense, 3 independent systems shouldn't fail simultaneously." Captain Reynolds keyed the intercom to reach the chief flight attendant. "Linda, we're experiencing some technical issues. Have your crew prepare for possible." The aircraft lurched violently to the left. Coffee cups flew across the cockpit. In the massive cabin behind them, 410 passengers screamed as their bodies slammed against seatbelts. The enormous plane, weighing over 500 tons fully loaded, began to roll like a toy being shaken by an angry child. "Flight controls not responding," Sarah shouted, pulling hard on her control column. Nothing happened. The massive aircraft continued its sickening roll, and Captain Reynolds felt sweat break out across his forehead as he realized they were experiencing something he had trained for but never truly believed would happen: complete flight control failure on the largest passenger aircraft in the world. "Electric system 1 failing," Sarah called out, reading the cascading warnings that now covered every display screen. "Electric 2 showing instability. Backup generator not engaging. Mike, we're losing everything." Captain Reynolds made a decision. His hand moved to the passenger address system, and when he spoke, he tried to keep his voice steady, tried to sound like the confident captain who had welcomed everyone aboard in Los Angeles 3 hours ago. But the 418 people listening heard something else in his tone. They heard fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing multiple system failures and are beginning an emergency descent. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency landing procedures." In the enormous cabin, the word sent a wave of terror through hundreds of people. Parents grabbed their children. Strangers held hands. People who hadn't prayed in years found themselves whispering desperate pleas to whatever God might be listening. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, but their faces betrayed what their training tried to hide: this wasn't a standard emergency. This was something catastrophic. Linda Martinez, the chief flight attendant with 15 years of experience, moved through the upper deck cabin with forced calm. She had been through emergency drills hundreds of times, had experienced minor emergencies on 3 previous flights, but nothing like this. The way the massive aircraft was moving, the uncontrolled rolling, the steep descent angle, the vibrations running through the entire structure, told her this was different. This was the nightmare scenario that flight attendants whispered about but never truly believed they would face. She watched passengers around her dealing with terror in different ways. Some sat frozen, faces pale, hands gripping armrests with white knuckles. Others sobbed openly. A businessman in first class was frantically typing what looked like goodbye messages on his phone. A young mother 3 rows back held her infant son against her chest, singing softly to him even as tears streamed down her face. An elderly couple held hands across the aisle, their faces peaceful with acceptance, as if they had lived long lives and could face death together without regret. The aircraft continued its descent, no longer under human control. Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen fought with controls that had become as useless as steering wheels disconnected from the wheels of a car. The massive A380 was falling through the sky, its enormous weight and momentum turning it into a 500-ton missile aimed at the earth below. "Try the backup hydraulic procedure," Captain Reynolds ordered, sweat now running down his face. Sarah's hands flew across the controls, following the emergency checklist they had both memorized years ago. Nothing changed. The aircraft continued its terrifying descent, dropping through 35,000 feet now, the altimeter unwinding with sickening speed. "Ram air turbine deployed," Sarah reported, referencing the emergency generator that should have provided backup power. "But it's not giving us enough hydraulic pressure. The feedback in the electrical system is preventing proper power distribution." Captain Reynolds tried manual reversion, attempted to bypass the flight computers entirely and control the aircraft through direct mechanical linkage. But even that failed. The cascade of failures had created a situation where normal backup systems couldn't function. They were experiencing something that should have been impossible, a combination of failures so unlikely that it hadn't been fully addressed in their training. In the cabin, flight attendants continued their emergency procedures, moving through the rows checking seatbelts, securing loose items, preparing passengers for impact. But they all knew the truth. At the rate they were descending, at the angle they were falling, with no apparent control being regained, they were looking at hundreds of deaths when they hit the ground. In seat 42F, 12-year-old Maya Rodriguez sat perfectly still. While adults around her sobbed and prayed, while grown men trembled and strong women wept, Maya listened. She listened to the sounds of the aircraft, to the whine of the engines, to the subtle changes in the hydraulic systems that most passengers couldn't even hear. And she recognized something. This wasn't just any emergency. This was the specific cascade failure pattern her father had spent the last 5 years of his life studying. Maya's father, Captain David Rodriguez, had died 2 years ago when the small plane he was testing crashed during a research flight. He had been one of the world's leading experts on large aircraft emergencies, a man who trained other pilots on how to handle the impossible situations that arose when massive jets lost multiple systems simultaneously. He had pioneered unconventional techniques specifically designed for aircraft the size of the A380, techniques that accounted for the enormous mass, the complex redundant systems, the physics that made flying a 500-ton aircraft completely different from flying smaller planes. David Rodriguez had been obsessed with a specific scenario, what he called the cascade convergence failure, on heavy aircraft. He had recognized through his research that the A380's redundant systems, while individually reliable, could create unexpected feedback loops if multiple failures occurred in a specific sequence. The hydraulic pumps, the electrical generators, the flight control computers, they were all designed to back each other up, but under certain rare conditions, their interaction could actually make the situation worse rather than better. The aviation industry had dismissed his concerns. His papers had been rejected by major journals. Airlines had refused to incorporate his unconventional procedures into their training programs. They called him alarmist, said he was creating fear about situations so unlikely they weren't worth addressing. Some of his colleagues suggested he was becoming paranoid, seeing dangers that didn't really exist. But David Rodriguez had been certain he was right. He had run thousands of simulations, tested his theories exhaustively, developed step-by-step procedures for handling the cascade convergence failure. He had tried to convince anyone who would listen that this situation could happen, and when it did, conventional procedures would not only fail but would actually accelerate the disaster. After his death, Maya had immersed herself in his work. She had read every technical manual in his office, studied every simulation report, watched hours of video recordings where he explained his research. She had spent hundreds of hours on the professional-grade flight simulator he kept in their garage, the one that cost more than most people's cars, the one that could recreate any emergency scenario imaginable. She had done this partly from grief, partly from love, and partly because she wanted to understand the work that had consumed her father's final years. Her mother had worried about her obsession, had gently suggested that maybe Maya was spending too much time alone in the garage, too many hours immersed in technical manuals meant for professional pilots. But Maya's grandmother, David's mother, had understood. Let her grieve in her own way, she had told Maya's mother. She's staying connected to him. She's honoring his memory. What none of them had understood was that Maya wasn't just honoring her father's memory. She was genuinely fascinated by his research. She understood it in ways that surprised even herself. The complex interactions between hydraulic systems and electrical generators, the feedback loops that could develop in flight control computers, the physics of controlling a 500-ton aircraft when multiple systems failed, it all made perfect sense to her. Her father had been an exceptional teacher, able to explain complex concepts in ways that made them clear and logical. And Maya had inherited not just his teaching but his analytical mind, his ability to see patterns and understand systems. Now, sitting in seat 42F with 417 other people screaming around her, Maya realized with crystal clarity that her father's research, the research that mainstream aviation had dismissed as too radical, too unconventional, was the only thing that could save everyone aboard Flight 441. She recognized the pattern. The specific sequence of warnings she had heard over the intercom, the way the aircraft was moving, the sounds of the system struggling, it all matched exactly what her father had predicted. Hydraulic cascade failure combined with electrical system degradation on an A380 created a specific condition that conventional emergency procedures couldn't address. Her father had proven this in simulation hundreds of times. He had developed an alternative approach, a sequence of actions that seemed counterintuitive but which worked with the unique physics of massive aircraft instead of against them. The problem, as her father had discovered, was that standard procedures assumed each system could be recovered independently. But on the A380, when certain failures occurred in a specific sequence, the systems became interdependent in unexpected ways. Trying to restore hydraulic pressure using standard procedures actually increased the load on the electrical system, which caused voltage fluctuations that prevented the hydraulic pumps from operating efficiently, which caused the flight computers to issue commands that further destabilized the electrical system. It was a feedback loop, and conventional training taught pilots to take actions that made the loop stronger rather than breaking it. Her father's solution required doing something that seemed insane, completely shutting down all hydraulic systems simultaneously, allowing the electrical system to stabilize without the load of the hydraulic pumps, then bringing the systems back online in a specific non-standard sequence that prevented the feedback loop from reforming. It violated every principle of redundancy and backup systems that pilots were taught. It required 30 seconds during which the aircraft would be completely uncontrollable. It seemed like suicide. But David Rodriguez had proven in simulation that it worked. And Maya knew, with the terrible certainty that comes from true expertise, that it was the only thing that would save Flight 441. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendant working her section, a woman named Jessica who had been kind to Maya during boarding, immediately rushed over. "Honey, you need to stay seated and keep your belt fastened," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice gentle despite the panic in her eyes. "I need to talk to the pilots," Maya said calmly. "I know what's wrong with the plane. I know how to fix it." Jessica's face softened with sympathy. She thought Maya was just a terrified child, panicking, inventing some fantasy to cope with the horror of their situation. "Sweetheart, the pilots are doing everything they can. You need to sit down and—" "My father was Captain David Rodriguez," Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through with unexpected authority. "He trained A380 pilots on emergency procedures for the past 10 years before he died. I've studied his research. I know you're experiencing hydraulic cascade failure with electrical degradation. I know the standard procedures won't work. And I know the unconventional sequence that will. Jessica stared at the 12-year-old girl in front of her. Something in Maya's eyes, a certainty, a knowledge that seemed impossible for a child, made her hesitate. She had been a flight attendant long enough to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her that this wasn't a panicking child. This was someone who genuinely knew something important. "Please," Maya said. "We have maybe 5 minutes before we're too low for any recovery. 418 people will die if I don't talk to them right now. My father spent 5 years developing procedures for exactly this emergency. He proved them in simulation thousands of times. The aviation industry refused to listen to him. But he was right. And I can prove it if you let me talk to the pilots." Jessica made a decision that would haunt and amaze her for the rest of her life. She took Maya's hand and led her through the massive cabin, past rows and rows of terrified passengers, toward the front of the aircraft. Other flight attendants tried to stop them, confused about why Jessica was taking a child toward the cockpit during an emergency. But Jessica pushed forward, pulling Maya through the chaos. As they moved through the cabin, Maya saw the faces of hundreds of people who thought they were about to die. She saw a teenage boy about her age holding his little sister, whispering to her that everything would be okay even though his face showed he didn't believe it. She saw an older man praying in what sounded like Arabic, his prayer beads moving through his fingers. She saw a woman who looked like she might be pregnant, one hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face as she apologized to her unborn child for not protecting them. Maya felt the weight of what she was about to do. If her father's procedures didn't work, she would be responsible for giving these people false hope in their final minutes. If she was wrong, if she had misunderstood something in his research, if the situation was different than what she thought, then 418 people would still die and she would die knowing she had failed them all. But she also knew that doing nothing guaranteed their deaths. The pilots were following standard procedures, and those procedures were failing. Her father's research offered the only alternative. She had to try. When they reached the reinforced cockpit door, Jessica knocked hard. She picked up the intercom phone that connected directly to the pilots. "Captain, there's a young passenger who says she has critical information about our emergency situation. She says her father was Captain David Rodriguez." There was a pause. Even through the door, even over the screaming of alarms and the terrified sounds of passengers, Maya could hear the shock in Captain Reynolds' voice when he responded. "David Rodriguez? The researcher? The one who worked on unconventional heavy aircraft emergency procedures?" "Yes, sir," Jessica said. "His daughter is here. She says she knows what's wrong and how to fix it." Another pause. Maya could imagine the conversation happening in the cockpit, two professional pilots trying to decide if they should trust the expertise of a 12-year-old child while 418 lives hung in the balance. They were dropping through 28,000 feet now. Every second of delay brought them closer to the point where no recovery would be possible. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen exchanged desperate glances. They had tried everything. Every procedure in their training, every backup system, every alternative approach they could think of, nothing had worked. They were out of ideas, out of time, out of hope. "Let her in," Captain Reynolds said finally. "David Rodriguez was brilliant. If his daughter knows something, we need to hear it. We've got nothing left to lose." The door lock clicked. The heavy cockpit door swung open. Maya stepped inside and saw two pilots fighting desperately with controls that weren't responding, their faces showing the terrible knowledge that they were failing, that hundreds of people were going to die, that nothing in their training had prepared them for this specific combination of failures. "Talk fast," Captain Reynolds said, not taking his eyes off his useless instruments. "We're at 27,000 feet and dropping at 3,000 feet per minute. Standard hydraulic failure procedures aren't working. Backup systems aren't engaging. We've got maybe 8 minutes until we're too low to recover even if we somehow regain control." Maya moved forward, her eyes scanning the instrument panels with the practiced efficiency her father had trained into her. She saw exactly what she expected, the specific failure pattern her father had documented, the cascade that conventional procedures couldn't address because they didn't account for how the A380's redundant systems interacted during multiple simultaneous failures. "You're following the standard hydraulic failure recovery procedure," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're trying to isolate the failed systems and switch to backups. But on the A380 with this specific failure pattern, that approach makes the problem worse. The electrical degradation is being caused by your attempts to switch systems. You're creating feedback loops in the power distribution network." First Officer Chen looked at Maya with shock. "How does a 12-year-old know about power distribution feedback loops?" "My father spent 5 years studying this exact scenario," Maya said. "He proved in simulation that conventional procedures fail with this failure combination on heavy aircraft. The A380's electrical system can't handle the switching loads when you're trying to restore multiple hydraulic systems simultaneously. Every time you try to bring a backup system online, it creates a voltage spike that destabilizes the flight computers, which causes them to issue incorrect commands to the remaining hydraulic systems, which creates more electrical load, which makes everything worse." She pointed at one of the displays. "See that voltage fluctuation pattern? That's the feedback loop. Your actions aren't fixing the problem, they're amplifying it. You need to break the cycle completely before you can restore any control." Captain Reynolds shook his head, his hands still fighting uselessly with the controls. "How do we break it? We've tried everything in the manual." "You need to do something that's not in the manual," Maya said. "Something my father developed specifically for this failure pattern. You need to shut down all hydraulic pump switches simultaneously for 30 seconds, then bring them back up in a specific sequence that doesn't follow standard priority." The cockpit went silent except for the screaming alarms. Both pilots stared at Maya with expressions mixing desperation and disbelief. "That's insane," Sarah Chen said finally. "Shutting down all hydraulic pumps means we'll have zero control authority. The aircraft will be completely uncontrollable for 30 seconds. At this descent rate, in 30 seconds we'll drop another 1,500 feet. We're already at 25,000 feet. If we lose control completely, we might not be able to recover before we hit the ground." "You already don't have control," Maya pointed out, her voice calm but urgent. "The feedback loops in your power system mean your controls aren't doing anything anyway. What you need to do is reset the entire hydraulic power distribution network. 30 seconds of complete shutdown lets the electrical system stabilize without the load and the switching demands. Then bringing the pumps back up in non-standard sequence, pump 3 first, then 1, then 4, then 2, prevents the feedback loops from reforming because you're not overloading any single electrical bus during the restoration." Captain Reynolds looked at his altimeter. 24,000 feet and falling. 8 minutes to impact, maybe less. He thought about the 410 passengers and 8 crew members behind him. He thought about his wife and 2 daughters waiting for him at home. He thought about every principle of aviation safety he had learned in 25 years of flying. And he thought about David Rodriguez, a brilliant researcher whose unconventional ideas had been dismissed by an industry that preferred established procedures to innovative thinking. He remembered reading about Rodriguez's death 2 years ago, remembered thinking it was a tragedy that such a talented pilot and researcher had died before his work was fully recognized. "Sarah," he said quietly. "What do you think?" First Officer Chen looked at the instrument panels, at the cascading failures that nothing in their training had prepared them to handle, at the altimeter continuing its terrifying countdown towards zero. "I think we're dead in 7 minutes if we keep doing what we're doing," she said. "I think this 12-year-old knows more about our specific emergency than we do. And I think David Rodriguez was probably right about everything, and the industry was wrong to dismiss his research." She looked at Maya. "If we do this and it doesn't work, we'll have maybe 4 minutes before impact instead of 7. 4 minutes to say goodbye, to make peace, to prepare for the end. If we don't do this, we have 7 minutes but no hope. I'd rather have 4 minutes with a chance than 7 minutes with none." Captain Reynolds made the hardest decision of his career. He looked at the 12-year-old girl standing in his cockpit, saw the certainty in her eyes and the intelligence in her face, saw her father's legacy living on through her knowledge and her courage, and chose to trust her. "Tell me exactly what to do," he said. Maya moved closer to the center console, her heart pounding but her voice steady. This was what her father had trained her for, even though neither of them had known it at the time. All those hours in the simulator, all those technical discussions, all those evenings spent reviewing emergency procedures, it had all been preparation for this moment. "First Officer Chen, you need to override the automatic pump protection system," Maya said. "There's a guarded switch on your lower right panel, lift the guard and move the switch to override position. That will let us shut down all pumps simultaneously without the computer trying to restart them automatically." Sarah's hands moved to the panel. She found the switch, lifted the red guard that protected it, and moved it to override. "Done. Captain Reynolds, you need to simultaneously switch off all hydraulic pump switches," Maya continued. "All of them at once, left hand on pumps 1 and 2, right hand on pumps 3 and 4. It has to be simultaneous because if you shut them down in sequence, the electrical system will try to compensate and you'll create new feedback loops. On my count." Captain Reynolds positioned his hands over the 4 switches. His training screamed at him that this was wrong, that shutting down all hydraulic pumps would kill them all, that he was trusting his aircraft and everyone aboard to procedure suggested by a child who shouldn't be in his cockpit. But he had made his decision. He would trust Maya Rodriguez the same way he would have trusted her father. 3, 2, 1, off, Maya commanded. Captain Reynolds flipped all 4 switches simultaneously. Instantly, every hydraulic pressure indicator dropped to 0. The control columns in front of both pilots became completely limp, offering no resistance, controlling nothing. The massive A380 was now a 500-ton glider falling through the sky with absolutely no human influence on its trajectory whatsoever. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered. They were at 22,000 feet now, dropping faster because without any control surfaces working, the aircraft was falling in whatever attitude the last moments of partial control had left it in. In the cabin behind them, passengers felt the change as the descent became even steeper, even more terrifying. People who thought they were already experiencing maximum fear discovered they were wrong. Some passengers began screaming. Others prayed louder. The young mother holding her infant son clutched him tighter, still singing through her tears. The elderly couple holding hands across the aisle closed their eyes together, accepting death. Throughout the enormous aircraft, 418 people confronted their mortality. Maya watched the chronometer on the instrument panel, counting down the 30 seconds her father's research had determined was necessary for the electrical system to fully stabilize. She could see the voltage indicators beginning to smooth out, the wild fluctuations decreasing as the electrical generators no longer had to handle the impossible demands of multiple hydraulic pumps fighting against feedback loops. But 30 seconds felt like 30 hours. Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen sat helpless while their aircraft fell uncontrolled through the sky. Everything in their training told them they had just killed everyone aboard. They had surrendered the only control they had, and now they were simply passengers in a falling aircraft, waiting to see if a 12-year-old girl's inherited knowledge would save them or if they had just accelerated their own deaths. 20 seconds. 19,000 feet. Falling at nearly 4,000 feet per minute now. The ground was rushing up toward them in the darkness. 25 seconds. 17,000 feet. Some passengers had stopped screaming, moved beyond terror into a strange calm acceptance. 28 seconds. 15,000 feet. Maya kept her eyes on the chronometer and the electrical system indicators. 30 seconds. "Now bring them back up," Maya said, her voice cutting through the chaos of alarms. But not in standard sequence. "First Officer Chen, activate pump 3 only. Wait 5 seconds, then activate pump 1. Sarah's hand moved to pump 3. She threw the switch. The pump began spinning up, and for the first time since the emergency began, it came online cleanly. No voltage spike. No feedback loop. The electrical system handled the load smoothly. Pump 3 online and stable, Sarah reported, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in 10 minutes. Wait 5 seconds, Maya reminded her. The electrical system needs time to adjust to the load before you add another pump. They waited. 5 seconds felt like forever, but Maya knew her father's research had been precise. 5 seconds was how long the A380's electrical system needed to fully accommodate one hydraulic pump before it could handle another without creating instability. Now pump 1, Maya said. Sarah activated pump 1. Again, it came online smoothly. Hydraulic pressure began building in systems 1 and 3. Pumps 1 and 3 are online and stable, Sarah said, her voice filled with amazement. We're getting hydraulic pressure. Mike, we're getting pressure. Captain Reynolds looked at his hydraulic indicators. After 10 minutes of zeros and failures, he was seeing the needles climb toward operational levels. But they weren't out of danger yet. They were at 13,000 feet now, still falling, still uncontrolled. Captain Reynolds, wait 10 seconds after pump 1, then activate pump 4, Maya instructed. Then wait 5 more seconds and activate pump 2. They followed her sequence exactly. Pump 4 came online. Then pump 2. And slowly, miraculously, hydraulic pressure built across all systems. The electrical indicators showed stable voltage. The feedback loops that had been destroying their control were gone. Try the controls, Maya said quietly. Captain Reynolds pulled gently on his control column. And the massive aircraft responded. After 3 minutes of complete uncontrollability, after everyone aboard had accepted they were going to die, the A380 began to level out. The sickening descent slowed. The nose began to rise. It's working, Sarah breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. The controls are responding. We have hydraulic pressure across all systems. We have flight control authority. They were at 12,000 feet now, but the descent rate was decreasing. Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen worked together, their hands moving across controls that now responded as designed, gradually bringing the massive aircraft back under full human control. The A380 leveled out at 10,000 feet, no longer falling but flying straight and level. Captain Reynolds keyed the passenger address system. His hand was shaking as he picked up the microphone. This time, his voice was different, still shaking, but with overwhelming relief rather than fear. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have regained full control of the aircraft. The emergency is over. I repeat, the emergency is over. We're going to make an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport, but everyone is going to be okay. Everyone is going to be okay. The sound that erupted from the cabin was unlike anything the pilots had ever heard, 418 people simultaneously crying, laughing, screaming with relief, embracing strangers, thanking God or the universe or simple luck or whatever they believed in. People who had been certain they would die in the next few minutes discovered they were going to live. Parents hugged their children. Strangers held each other. The young mother kissed her infant son's head over and over, her tears of terror transforming into tears of joy. The elderly couple who had been holding hands across the aisle unbuckled and embraced, sobbing together. Throughout the enormous aircraft, 418 people experienced the most intense emotional transformation of their lives, from acceptance of death to the gift of continued life, from terror to relief, from goodbye to hello again. In the cockpit, First Officer Chen turned to look at Maya, tears streaming down her face. You just saved 418 lives. You're 12 years old, and you just saved 418 lives. My father saved them, Maya said quietly. I just remembered what he taught me. Captain Reynolds looked at this extraordinary child standing in his cockpit. Your father's research, did the aviation industry really reject it? Maya nodded. They said his procedures were too unconventional. Too different from standard training. They said the failure scenario he was studying was too unlikely to warrant developing new procedures. They refused to publish his papers or incorporate his techniques into pilot training. They were wrong, Sarah said firmly. Your father was right about everything. He understood something about heavy aircraft emergencies that the rest of the industry missed. And you just proved it by saving all of us. Captain Reynolds guided Flight 441 toward an emergency landing at Denver International Airport, the nearest suitable facility for an A380 emergency landing. He declared a full emergency, requesting maximum crash and rescue response. Fire trucks, ambulances, emergency response teams, dozens of vehicles raced into position along the runway, preparing for the worst. Controllers in Denver Tower had been following Flight 441's emergency, had heard the desperate communications as the pilots fought to control their aircraft, had tracked the terrifying descent on radar. They had called in every emergency resource available, had cleared all other traffic from the airport, had prepared for what they thought would be a mass casualty disaster. But when Flight 441 touched down 40 minutes after Maya's intervention, the landing was rough but controlled. The massive aircraft rolled down the runway, its brakes and remaining systems functioning well enough to bring it safely to a stop. Emergency crews surrounded the plane immediately, expecting to find casualties, expecting to begin rescue operations for a disaster that would dominate news headlines for weeks. Instead, they found 418 people who were shaken, crying, traumatized, but alive. Every single person aboard Flight 441 walked off that aircraft. Not a single serious injury. Not a single casualty. A complete survival of what should have been an unsurvivable emergency. The emergency responders stood in amazement as passenger after passenger descended the evacuation slides, many of them still sobbing, many embracing the firefighters and paramedics who had expected to find bodies. The young mother came down the slide holding her infant son, kissing the ground when she reached it. The elderly couple walked down hand in hand, thanking everyone they encountered. The teenage boy who had comforted his little sister carried her down on his back, both of them crying with relief. And through it all, the emergency workers kept asking the same question: how? How did an aircraft experiencing complete flight control failure somehow recover? How did everyone survive? What happened aboard Flight 441? The investigation began immediately. FAA officials, airline executives, aviation safety experts descended on Denver to understand what had happened. They pulled the flight data recorder, interviewed the pilots, examined every system on the damaged aircraft. And slowly, the story emerged. Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen told investigators about the cascade failure, about following standard procedures that didn't work, about the 12-year-old girl who walked into their cockpit with knowledge that saved everyone aboard. At first, investigators didn't believe it. A child? Providing technical guidance that experienced pilots couldn't? Suggesting procedures that violated everything in standard training? It seemed impossible. I know how it sounds, Captain Reynolds told the lead investigator. I know it seems crazy that we followed advice from a 12-year-old. But she knew things about our emergency that we didn't know. She understood the failure pattern in ways our training never addressed. And she was right. Everything she told us to do worked exactly as she said it would. The investigator, a veteran pilot named Thomas Chen who had spent 30 years analyzing aircraft accidents, shook his head in disbelief. Captain, you shut down all hydraulic systems simultaneously during an emergency descent. That's the opposite of every procedure we teach. How could you make that decision? Because nothing else was working, Mike Reynolds said simply. We were at 24,000 feet and falling. We had maybe 7 minutes until impact. Every standard procedure had failed. Maya Rodriguez offered us an alternative that her father had developed specifically for our failure scenario. We had nothing to lose and 418 lives to save. So we trusted her. And if her procedures hadn't worked? Thomas asked. Then we would have died 4 minutes sooner than we were going to die anyway, Mike said. But we would have died knowing we tried everything possible. That we didn't just follow standard procedures to our deaths when an alternative existed. Thomas Chin requested access to David Rodriguez's research files. Maya's mother, Isabella Rodriguez, provided investigators with boxes of her late husband's technical documents, simulation records, procedure development notes. She gave them access to the flight simulator in their garage, showed them the thousands of hours of simulation data David had recorded while developing his unconventional procedures. Aviation safety experts spent 3 weeks analyzing the research. They reviewed David Rodriguez's papers, read his technical analysis, studied his simulation results. They brought in electrical engineers to evaluate his theories about power distribution feedback loops. They consulted with aeronautical engineers about his understanding of heavy aircraft flight dynamics. They ran their own simulations using his procedures. And they discovered that Captain David Rodriguez had been absolutely, completely, brilliantly correct about everything. His analysis of cascade convergence failures on the A380 was flawless. His understanding of how electrical system feedback loops could prevent hydraulic system recovery was groundbreaking. His unconventional procedures for breaking those feedback loops and restoring control were not only valid but demonstrably superior to standard approaches in specific failure scenarios. The aviation industry had been wrong to dismiss his research. They had been wrong to reject his papers. They had been wrong to refuse incorporating his techniques into pilot training. David Rodriguez had discovered something important about heavy aircraft safety, had developed procedures that could save hundreds of lives, and had been ignored because his ideas challenged established doctrine. This research should have been taken seriously years ago, Thomas Chin wrote in his preliminary report. Captain Rodriguez identified a real vulnerability in heavy aircraft emergency procedures. He developed effective solutions. He attempted to share his findings with the aviation community. His work was dismissed as too unconventional. And as a result, Flight 441 came within minutes of a catastrophic accident that would have killed 418 people. Only the fact that Captain Rodriguez's daughter possessed his knowledge and had the courage to apply it prevented that disaster. This represents a systemic failure in how our industry evaluates innovative safety research. The story became international news within hours. 12-year-old girl saves 418 lives, dominated headlines across the world. Maya's face appeared on television news programs in dozens of countries, on magazine covers, in social media posts shared millions of times. She became instantly famous, her name recognized by people who had never met her, her story inspiring everyone who heard it. News crews camped outside the Rodriguez home in California. Reporters called constantly, requesting interviews. Television producers wanted Maya to appear on their shows. Book publishers offered contracts for her story. The attention was overwhelming, relentless, inescapable. Maya's mother tried to shield her from the worst of it, but there was no way to completely escape the media frenzy. Isabella Rodriguez understood that the world wanted to celebrate her daughter, wanted to honor what Maya had done, but she also worried about the pressure this placed on a 12-year-old child. "We'll do a few interviews," Isabella told Maya. "We'll let people hear your story. But we don't have to do everything they ask. Your well-being is more important than any publicity." Maya gave several carefully managed interviews. She appeared on 3 major news programs, spoke with print journalists from national newspapers, participated in a press conference at the request of the FA. But she was uncomfortable with the attention, uncomfortable being treated as a hero when all she had done was remember her father's teaching. "I didn't do anything special," she told one interviewer. "I just knew something that the pilots didn't know. My father did the real work. He spent 5 years researching heavy aircraft emergencies, developing procedures, testing them in simulation. I just remembered what he taught me. He's the hero, not me." But the world disagreed. The world saw a 12-year-old girl who had walked into a cockpit during a catastrophic emergency and saved 418 lives through extraordinary knowledge and remarkable courage. The world saw a child who had honored her father's memory by mastering his research so completely that she could apply it under impossible pressure. The world saw a hero, whether Maya wanted that label or not. The passengers of Flight 441 certainly saw her as a hero. Many of them reached out to thank her personally, sending letters and emails expressing gratitude that words could barely convey. Some sent gifts, flowers, cards, donations to causes in her name. Several families invited Maya and her mother to visit them, wanting to show her the lives she had saved, wanting her to see the children who still had their parents, the grandparents who would see their grandchildren grow up, the people who got to continue living because of what she had done. Robert Chen, the man who had been traveling to his daughter's wedding, sent Maya a photo from the wedding. In it, he was dancing with his daughter, both of them smiling, both of them alive to share that moment because Flight 441 had landed safely. I walked my daughter down the aisle, his letter said. I danced with her at her reception. I hugged my wife and told her I loved her. I got to keep living my life because you had the courage to do something terrifying. You walked into that cockpit and took responsibility for 418 lives. You were just a child, but you saved us all. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you. Thank you for giving me back my life. Maya read that letter multiple times, crying each time. This was why her father's work had mattered. This was why he had spent 5 years developing procedures that the aviation industry dismissed. Not for recognition or fame, but because lives were at stake. Because passengers like Robert Chen deserved pilots and researchers who would do everything possible to bring them home safely. 6 months after Flight 441's emergency landing, the FAA announced new training requirements for pilots flying large aircraft. They mandated instruction in unconventional emergency procedures for heavy jets, based largely on Captain David Rodriguez's research. Airlines around the world began updating their training programs, teaching pilots the techniques that had saved Flight 441. The A380 manufacturer issued new emergency procedure guidance, incorporating David Rodriguez's findings about electrical system feedback loops and hydraulic cascade failures. The procedures that had been dismissed as too radical were now official manufacturer recommendations. Aviation safety organizations recognized Captain David Rodriguez posthumously with multiple awards. They acknowledged that his research represented an important contribution to heavy aircraft safety. They admitted that the industry had been wrong to dismiss his work. And they committed to evaluating innovative safety research more seriously in the future, to not rejecting ideas simply because they challenged established procedures. Maya received awards and honors as well. Airlines thanked her. Aviation organizations recognized her. Cities where Flight 441 passengers lived celebrated her. But the recognition that meant the most came from a quiet ceremony at the flight training facility where her father used to work. The facility dedicated their main A380 simulator to David Rodriguez's memory. They installed a plaque that read, Captain David Rodriguez Memorial Simulator, dedicated to advancing aviation safety through innovative research and unconventional thinking. His pioneering work on heavy aircraft emergency procedures, proven by his daughter Maya Rodriguez aboard Flight 441, continues saving lives today. Maya stood in front of that plaque with her mother, her grandmother, and several of her father's former colleagues. She read the words through tears, feeling the weight of her father's absence and the pride of his legacy. He would be so proud of you, her mother whispered, arm around Maya's shoulders. Not just for saving all those people, although that would have made him incredibly proud. But for understanding his work so completely. For honoring his research by learning it so thoroughly. For carrying forward his legacy. I miss him every day, Maya said quietly. I wish he could know that his research was right, that it saved everyone aboard Flight 441, that aviation is finally taking his ideas seriously. Her grandmother, a strong woman who had raised David as a single mother after his father died, knelt beside Maya. He knows, Mija. Wherever he is, he knows. And he's proud of you, not just for what you did on that airplane, but for who you are. For your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. One of David's former colleagues, a senior training captain named James Walsh, approached Maya. Your father was the best instructor I ever knew, he said. He taught me how to really think about emergencies, not just follow checklists but understand the principles behind the procedures. He made me a better pilot. And through you, he's making thousands of pilots better. His research is now part of standard training. Every A380 pilot in the world will learn his techniques. That's an extraordinary legacy. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And you, James continued, you have his gift for understanding aviation. The way you analyzed that emergency situation, the way you guided Captain Reynolds through your father's procedures, that showed exceptional knowledge and remarkable composure. You have your father's mind for this work. The months after Flight 441 were difficult for Maya in ways she hadn't expected. The fame was overwhelming, the attention exhausting. But more challenging was returning to normal life after doing something so extraordinary. How do you go back to 7th grade after saving 418 lives? How do you worry about homework and tests and friendship drama when you've confronted life and death at 38,000 feet? Her classmates treated her differently now. Some were in awe of her, talking about her rather than to her. Others seemed resentful, as if her extraordinary experience somehow diminished their own lives. Teachers didn't know how to relate to her. How do you grade the homework of someone who saved hundreds of lives? Maya felt isolated, separated from normal teenage experiences by something she hadn't asked for and didn't quite know how to process. She talked to a counselor about it, about how fame felt like a prison, about how she just wanted to be Maya rather than the girl who saved Flight 441. What you experienced was traumatic, the counselor told her gently. You confronted death. You took responsibility for hundreds of lives. You succeeded, but that doesn't erase the fear and stress of those moments. It's okay to struggle with this. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. What you did was extraordinary, but you're still a 12-year-old girl who deserves to have a normal childhood. But Maya's childhood could never be entirely normal after Flight 441. She had seen and done things that most people never experience. She had faced pressure that most adults never face. She had proven herself capable of extraordinary things, and that knowledge changed how she saw herself and how others saw her. She found comfort in her father's simulator. The garage where his equipment remained became her refuge, a place where she could practice flying without the pressure of real lives depending on her decisions. She continued studying aviation, not for fame but because she genuinely loved it, because understanding how massive aircraft worked felt like staying connected to her father. Her mother worried about the time Maya spent alone in the garage, but Maya's grandmother understood. Let her process this in her own way, she advised Isabella. She's grieving her father and processing what happened on Flight 441. The simulator is her way of working through all of it. 2 years passed. Maya turned 14, entered high school, slowly adjusted to being known as the girl who saved Flight 441. The media attention faded as other stories captured public attention. Life became more normal, though she still received occasional interview requests and invitations to speak at aviation events. The passengers of Flight 441 created a survivors group that met annually on the anniversary of their emergency. They gathered to remember how close they came to death and to celebrate the gift of continued life. At every gathering, they invited Maya and her mother, and Maya would come, still uncomfortable being the center of attention but recognizing how important it was to the people who lived because of what she had done. At the second annual gathering, attended by about 150 of the 418 survivors, Robert Chen stood up to speak. He was a successful architect, a man who spoke with confidence and conviction, but his voice shook with emotion as he addressed the room. 2 years ago, we all thought we were going to die, he said, looking around at the familiar faces of people who had shared the most terrifying experience of their lives. We were falling from the sky in the largest passenger aircraft in the world, and nothing the pilots tried was working. We had accepted death. We were saying goodbye to our loved ones in our minds, making peace with the end of our lives. He paused, looking directly at Maya. And then a 12-year-old girl saved us. Not through luck or accident, but through extraordinary knowledge and remarkable courage. She walked into that cockpit and took responsibility for 418 lives. She carried forward her father's research and proved that his unconventional ideas could save hundreds of people when conventional approaches failed. He gestured around the room. Because of Maya, we've all lived the last 2 years. We've celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. We've watched our children grow up. We've achieved personal goals and experienced joys we never would have known. My daughter had a baby 6 months ago. I'm a grandfather now. I got to hold my grandson because a 12-year-old girl had the knowledge and courage to save my life. Many people in the room were crying now, including Maya. So I want to thank you again, Maya, Robert continued, his own tears falling freely. For saving us that day. For giving us all these extra years. For giving us the gift of continued life. And I want to thank your father too, even though he's not here. He trained you. He taught you the knowledge that saved us. He did the research that made our survival possible. His legacy didn't die with him, it continued through you, and it continues through all the pilots who now train in his techniques, and through all the future lives those techniques will save. The room erupted in applause. Maya stood up, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude filling the space. She looked around at all these people, former strangers who had become like an extended family, all connected by one terrible night when they almost died but didn't. These gatherings reminded Maya why her father's work had mattered, why she had walked into that cockpit, why facing her fear had been worth it. These 150 people in this room, and the 268 others who couldn't attend, represented lives that continued because knowledge had been shared, because research had been done, because courage had been found when it was needed most. The years continued passing. Maya excelled in high school, particularly in math and physics. She joined her school's aviation club, taught younger students about principles of flight, organized field trips to airports and training facilities. She gave occasional talks at aviation safety conferences, speaking about her father's research and the importance of considering unconventional approaches to safety challenges. When she turned 18, Maya enrolled in an aviation university's flight training program. She earned her private pilot's license, then her commercial license, then her instrument and multi-engine ratings. She excelled in every phase of training, surprising instructors with her depth of knowledge and her maturity in the cockpit. But she also pursued an aerospace engineering degree, focusing on aircraft systems and safety analysis. She wanted to understand not just how to fly aircraft but how to make them safer, how to design better systems, how to develop improved procedures. She was continuing her father's work in her own way, combining pilot experience with engineering research to advance aviation safety. She wrote her senior thesis on electrical hydraulic system interactions in heavy aircraft, expanding on her father's research with modern data and analysis techniques. Her thesis was published in a major aviation safety journal, something her father's work had never achieved during his lifetime. She received it as vindication of his research, proof that the ideas once dismissed as too radical were now recognized as valuable contributions to aviation safety. Maya graduated at 22 with both her degree and her airline transport pilot license, qualified to fly as captain on commercial aircraft. Multiple airlines offered her positions, eager to hire someone with her unique combination of practical experience, engineering knowledge, and public recognition. She chose to start with a regional carrier, flying smaller jets to build experience before moving up to larger aircraft. She wanted to earn her progression to heavy jets through skill and time, not skip steps because of her fame. Her father had taught her that aviation safety depended on thorough, methodical development of expertise, and she honored that teaching by following a traditional career path. By 27, she was qualified to fly the A380. Her first flight as first officer on that aircraft type was deeply emotional. She sat in the right seat of the same type of massive plane that had almost killed her and 417 others 10 years earlier, the same cockpit where she had stood as a 12-year-old providing emergency guidance to experienced pilots. Captain Michelle Torres, who was flying with Maya that day, knew her story and understood the significance of the moment. "How does it feel?" Michelle asked as they prepared for departure. "Strange," Maya admitted. "Wonderful and sad and proud all at once. I wish my father could see this. I wish he could know that I'm flying the aircraft he specialized in, using the procedures he developed, continuing the work he started. He knows, Michelle said gently. Somehow, he knows. And he's proud. The flight was routine, Los Angeles to Sydney, 15 hours of standard operations with no emergencies, no drama, just professional execution of procedures that brought 380 passengers safely to their destination. But for Maya, it was profound. She was now not just the girl who had saved Flight 441 but a qualified heavy jet pilot, capable of commanding the enormous aircraft her father had devoted his career to understanding. She continued her father's research in her spare time, publishing papers on heavy aircraft emergency procedures, working with aviation safety organizations to improve training standards, serving on advisory boards that evaluated new safety technologies. She became recognized as one of the leading experts on large aircraft emergencies, carrying forward the work her father had started decades earlier. And every time she flew, every time she safely transported hundreds of passengers to their destinations, she thought about Flight 441. She thought about those terrifying minutes when she was 12 years old and walked into a cockpit to save 418 lives. She thought about her father's research proving itself when conventional wisdom failed. She thought about the responsibility she had accepted that night and continued to accept every time she commanded an aircraft. 15 years after Flight 441, Maya was invited to speak at the International Aviation Safety Conference in Geneva. She was 27 now, a captain on A380s, a published researcher on aircraft safety systems, and still known worldwide as the girl who had saved 418 lives. She stood before an audience of over 1,000 aviation professionals, pilots, engineers, safety regulators, airline executives, and told them her story. But more importantly, she told them her father's story. Captain David Rodriguez spent the last 5 years of his life researching heavy aircraft emergencies, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the large auditorium. He identified vulnerability in how the aviation industry addressed cascade failures on massive jets. He developed procedures that worked when conventional approaches failed. He tried to share his findings with the aviation community through papers, presentations, and training programs. She paused, letting the weight of her next word settle. And the aviation industry dismissed him. Called his research too radical. Said his procedures violated established doctrine. Refused to publish his papers or incorporate his techniques into pilot training. He died without ever seeing his work fully recognized or implemented. The audience was completely silent. Then Flight 441 experienced exactly the cascade convergence failure my father had studied, Maya continued. The specific combination of hydraulic and electrical system failures that he had warned about, that he had developed procedures to address, that the industry had said was too unlikely to worry about. And I was aboard that aircraft, along with 417 other people, falling towards certain death. She described the emergency, the terror, the decision to walk into the cockpit. She explained her father's procedures, the risk of completely shutting down all hydraulic systems, the 30 seconds of total loss of control that were necessary to break the feedback loops. She showed data from the flight recorder, demonstrated how her father's techniques had restored control when nothing else worked. My father's research saved 418 lives, she said. But only because I happened to be aboard that specific flight, only because I had studied his work intensively enough to remember his procedures, only because I had the courage to suggest something that seemed insane to experienced pilots. We got lucky. But we shouldn't have needed luck. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. My father's research should have been taken seriously from the beginning. His papers should have been published. His procedures should have been incorporated into training. If the aviation industry had listened to him when he was alive, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Chen would have known what to do when Flight 441 systems failed. They wouldn't have needed a 12-year-old girl to walk into their cockpit and tell them how to save everyone aboard. She looked around the auditorium. The lesson of Flight 441 isn't just about the specific procedures my father developed. The lesson is about how our industry evaluates innovative safety research. Are we open to unconventional ideas, or do we dismiss anything that challenges established doctrine? Are we willing to seriously consider research that might save lives, even if it comes from unconventional sources or suggests uncomfortable changes to our procedures? The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. And after her speech, aviation professionals lined up to talk to her, to thank her for advocating for continued innovation in safety, to share their own experiences with research that had been dismissed or ignored. "Your father would be proud," one elderly pilot told her. He must have been in his 70s, with the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in aviation. "I flew with David Rodriguez 30 years ago, when we were both young first officers. Even then, he was thinking differently about aviation safety, questioning procedures, suggesting improvements. The industry needs more people like him. And now, through you, his work continues making aviation safer for everyone." Maya felt tears on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for remembering him." The passengers of Flight 441 continued their annual gatherings, now attended by people from around the world who made the journey to commemorate their survival. The 15th anniversary gathering was held in Los Angeles, close to where their terrifying journey had begun. Over 200 people attended, passengers, crew members, family members of those aboard, even some of the emergency responders who had met the aircraft in Denver expecting disaster but finding survival. They shared stories, showed photos of the lives they had lived since that night, celebrated the continued existence that Maya's knowledge and courage had made possible. Robert Chen, now a 60-year-old grandfather of 3, stood up to speak as he had at previous gatherings. 15 years ago, my daughter was about to get married, and I thought I would miss her wedding because I was falling from the sky in a crashing airplane. Today, my daughter has 3 children. My oldest grandson is 9 years old. I've lived 15 years that I never would have had. I've experienced joys I never would have known. All because of Maya Rodriguez and her father's research. He looked at Maya, sitting in the front row next to her mother. I used to think about what I would have missed if Flight 441 had crashed. My daughter's wedding. The birth of my grandchildren. 15 years with my wife. But lately, I think about it differently. I think about what I got instead of what I almost lost. I got to walk my daughter down the aisle. I got to hold each of my grandchildren when they were born. I got 15 extra years that feel like a gift I didn't earn but received anyway." His voice broke. "And I want Maya to know that every good thing I've experienced in the last 15 years, I owe to her. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday evening sitting with my family, all of it exists because she had the courage to walk into that cockpit. Because her father taught her extraordinary knowledge and she had the wisdom and bravery to use it when everything depended on her being right." Later that evening, after most people had left, Maya walked outside to get some air. She found a quiet spot overlooking the city lights of Los Angeles, the city where Flight 441 had departed 15 years ago carrying 418 people who thought they were facing a routine overnight flight. Her mother found her there. Isabella Rodriguez was 55 now, her hair graying, her face showing the years that had passed since losing her husband. But she was still strong, still the steady presence that had helped Maya navigate the overwhelming aftermath of Flight 441. "What are you thinking about?" Isabella asked, sitting beside her daughter. "Dad," Maya said quietly. "I'm thinking about how much he would love this. Not the fame or the recognition, but knowing that his research saved all those people. Knowing that his unconventional ideas proved essential when conventional approaches failed. Knowing that aviation finally took his work seriously. He would be incredibly proud of you," Isabella said. "Not just for saving Flight 441, though that would make him proud. But for becoming the person you are. An excellent pilot. A serious researcher. An advocate for aviation safety. You've carried forward his legacy in ways he never could have imagined." Maya leaned against her mother. "I miss him. Even after all these years, I miss him." "I know, sweetheart. I do too. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights and thinking about David Rodriguez, husband, father, researcher, pilot. A man who had died too young but whose work continued saving lives long after his death. A man whose unconventional thinking had been dismissed during his lifetime but vindicated through his daughter's courage. "He lives on through you," Isabella said finally. "Through your knowledge, your passion for aviation, your commitment to safety. Through the 418 people who survived Flight 441. Through every pilot who now trains in his procedures. Through every passenger who flies safely because his research improved aviation safety. His legacy is alive and growing." Maya nodded, feeling the truth of her mother's words. Her father had died, but his work continued. His research saved lives. His unconventional ideas improved aviation safety worldwide. And through Maya, his passion for understanding and improving heavy aircraft operations continued pushing the industry forward. 20 years after Flight 441, Maya Rodriguez was serving as captain on an A380 flight from Paris to Singapore. It was a routine overnight flight, the kind she had flown hundreds of times. But as she guided her massive aircraft through the darkness at 38,000 feet, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her father, who had died when she was 10, leaving behind research that the aviation industry dismissed. She thought about being 12 years old and recognizing the emergency pattern aboard Flight 441. She thought about walking into that cockpit despite her terror, accepting responsibility for 418 lives, trusting her father's procedures even when experienced pilots doubted. She thought about the 15 years since then, becoming a pilot, earning her qualifications, building expertise, continuing her father's research. She thought about the hundreds of flights she had commanded safely, the thousands of passengers she had transported, the responsibility she accepted every time she sat in the captain's seat of a massive aircraft. And she understood that Flight 441 had changed not just her life but the entire trajectory of aviation safety. Her father's research was now standard training. His unconventional procedures had been validated, refined, and incorporated into pilot education worldwide. His understanding of heavy aircraft emergencies continued saving lives every day, preventing future disasters through knowledge that had once been dismissed as too radical. Captain Maya Rodriguez guided her A380 smoothly toward Singapore, her hands confident on the controls, her knowledge deep and thorough, her commitment to safety absolute. She was 27 years old and commanded one of the largest passenger aircraft in the world. She carried 385 souls who trusted her to bring them safely to their destination. And she carried her father's legacy, proving every day that unconventional thinking, rigorous research, and the courage to question established doctrine can save lives and improve an industry that affects millions of people worldwide. Flight 441 had taught the world that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources. That sometimes a 12-year-old girl possesses knowledge that can save hundreds of lives. That sometimes the most important thing anyone can do is have the courage to use what they know when everything depends on being right. And 20 years later, that lesson continued saving lives around the world, every single day, aboard massive aircraft flying safely through the skies carrying people home to the ones they loved. Her father would have been proud. And somehow, somewhere, Maya believed he knew.